Welcome to our second walk through Warsaw. After exploring the old town, it's time for Krakowskie Przedmieście, a grand historic avenue that has been Warsaw's showcase for centuries. You can treat this walk as a continuation of our previous tour, but it also works perfectly as a separate journey through one of the most important parts of the Polish capital. If you enjoy walks like this, make sure to subscribe to our channel. And as always, you'll find the map for this route in the video description and on our website. So now, let's begin today's walk along Krakowskie Przedmieście. Krakowskie Przedmieście is one of the most famous streets in Warsaw, but its current name tells only part of the story. Before this road became associated with the route to Kraków, it mainly led toward Czersk, and that is where its earlier name came from, Czapskie Przedmieście. This was no coincidence. In the Middle Ages, Czersk was one of the most important centers of Mazovia. It was the seat of the Mazovian dukes and an important crossing point near the Vistula River. But after the death of the Mazovian Piast Duke Janusz III, Mazovia was incorporated into the Kingdom of Poland in 1526. From that moment on, the old route gained new importance as the road leading toward Kraków, at the time the capital of Poland and the seat of the king. Over time, the name Krakowskie Przedmieście became established, and it was officially given to the street in 1865. The word Przedmieście, meaning suburb, is also important here. This part of Old Warsaw developed outside the walls of the old town, which we talk about during our first walk. For centuries, those walls mark the boundary of the oldest part of the city. Today, Krakowskie Przedmieście is just over half a mile long. It runs from Castle Square to Kopernika Street, where it continues as Nowy Świat, and it forms the northern section of Warsaw's famous royal route. For centuries, this was one of the city's most important avenues, lined with palaces, churches, monasteries, and major institutions. Even today it is often called Warsaw's Grand Salon, and its elegant character is emphasized by the modern redesign, which widened the sidewalks and limited car traffic. And if you come here by tram and got off at Stare Miasto stop, there is one more little attraction waiting for you. From the lower level of the WZ route, you get a great view of the old town rising above the escarpment. And from here you can ride up to Castle Square on the first escalators ever installed in Poland, opened in 1949 together with the WZ route. After renovation, they still keep their socialist realist character. In the passageway, you can still see sculptures of soldiers and workers, and beneath the upper level, even the historic control cabinet from the old escalators has been preserved. At the top, we arrive directly in front of the post-war, historically styled frontage of Castle Square. This side of the square was rebuilt after the destruction of World War II. Designed to evoke Old Warsaw and reconstructed on the basis of archival views, including paintings of Canaletto, and we will come back to Canaletto more than once during this walk. The first row of buildings is made up of several neighboring townhouses. Today they look like old urban architecture, although in reality they are largely the result of post-war reconstruction. The first building we see right after leaving the escalators is the John House. And here, John is not the first name, but the surname of the lawyer Alexander John. In the past, it was pronounced more like Jon, and that is where the house got its name. Originally dating back to the 18th century, it was rebuilt after the war to once again close the corner of the square. Next to it stands the Przemowski house, whose roots go back to the 17th century. Its Rococo appearance comes from an 18th century remodeling. Further along we see the Maciej Kurowski house, once the home of a wealthy merchant. Together, these houses form the first frontage that greet us when we reach the upper level, and they show very clearly how post-war Warsaw tried to restore the historic character of this place. On the opposite side of the street, your eye is immediately drawn to St. Anne's Church, one of the oldest churches in Warsaw. Its story began in 1454, when Duchess Anna of Mazovia, the widow of Duke Bolesław III, brought the Bernardine monks here from Kraków. She founded a monastery and the first church along what was then the Czersk route, still outside the city walls. After the Great Fire of 1515, the church was rebuilt, and the Gothic structure, which still forms much of its oldest core, was already in use again by 1518. But the site we see from Krakowskie Przedmieście is much later. The church received its elegant present-day facade in 1788, designed by Christian Piotr Aigner. It was inspired by Italian architecture, especially the Palladian style, giving the church a more formal, classical appearance. In the niches of the facade you can see 4 statues of the evangelists, created by royal sculptors Jakub Monaldi and Franciszek Pink. They were a gift from King Stanisław August and remain some of the most beautiful details of the entire exterior. It is also worth taking a closer look at the main entrance. The portal is framed by 2 small columns and topped with a semicircular arch. Inside it there is a relief of an eagle in a laurel wreath. This Roman eagle motif fits perfectly with the classical language of the whole facade, with its references to antiquity, to the idea of a triumphal arch. Some researchers even point to a Roman model from the time of Emperor Trajan, known from the facade of the Church of Santi Apostoli in Rome. In the tympanum, you can also see the monogram SA. It is most often understood as referring to Santa Anna, Saint Anne, rather than to the king's initials. That association comes up quite often, because the facade was created in the era of King Stanisław August and was connected with his court. But the monogram itself refers to the patron saint of the church. And it is this elegant classical facade that made St. Anne's Church one of the most recognizable landmarks along Krakowskie Przedmieście. The fact that St. Anne's is now an academic church also has historical roots. In the interwar period, the church was not returned to the Bernardines, who had earlier been removed from here by the Russian imperial authorities. Instead, it was assigned to the academic community, a role it still plays today. Next to the church stands the bell tower, originally founded by Queen Anna Jagiellon between 1578 and 1584. Its present appearance, however, comes from an early 19th century remodeling, also associated with Aigner. That was when the tower was made taller, connected to the church by a three-arched wall, and topped with a terrace and a small gloriette. Today it is one of the best-known viewpoints in this part of Warsaw. It is also worth stepping inside, because the interior of St. Anne's is famous for its remarkable illusionistic paintings. Brother Walenty Żebrowski covered the church's vaults and walls with frescoes, creating a decoration that visually expands the space and makes the interior feel larger than it really is. A special place here is the chapel of Blessed Władysław of Gielniów, a Bernardine friar, an outstanding preacher, and the author of religious songs, connected with this church from the early 16th century. His relics are kept here, and for centuries he has been venerated as one of the patrons of Warsaw. In the old monastery buildings, you can also find an extraordinary crystal vault from 1513-1514, visible in the cloister of the former monastery. And if we go behind the church, through the gate, the courtyard and the cloisters, we reach St. Anne's Garden. It's a quiet spot on the escarpment, with echoes of the old Vistula panorama. From this side you also get the best view of the church's structure itself. The Gothic apse supported by buttresses and a Baroque gable above it. It is a completely different view from the one we see on Krakowskie Przedmieście, and that is exactly what makes it so interesting. Also notice the many niches and openings visible in the walls. They are not just traces of wartime damage. Many of them are remains of the church's oldest Gothic phase, former pointed arch windows that were later bricked up, along with the exposed sections of medieval masonry. The war also left its mark here. In September 1939, the Germans destroyed the Loreto Chapel and damaged the roof over the nave. During the Warsaw Uprising, the church was taken over by German forces and turned into a defensive position. The sacristy windows were blocked with paving slabs, leaving only narrow firing slits, from which shots were fired toward the Praga side of the river. Toward the end of 1944, the roofs burned again, and moisture damaged parts of the plasterworks and polychrome decoration. And even after the war, the church almost suffered yet another disaster. During the construction of the WZ route in 1949, its walls and vaults began to crack, and part of the presbytery started sliding toward the escarpment. But St. Anne's survived. After the war, the church was saved, secured, and gradually restored to its former beauty. Today, it is once again one of the most beautiful churches along Krakowskie Przedmieście. When we return to Krakowskie Przedmieście and continue our walk, we soon reach the Guardhouse, right next to the church. It's not really a separate building, because it was created from a side wing of the former Bernardine monastery. After the third partition of Poland, when Warsaw came under Prussian rule, a guardhouse was arranged here, and that is where the name, still used today, comes from. Between 1818 and 1820, already during the time of the Congress Kingdom of Poland, the facade was remodeled and given its distinctive two-story arcaded gallery, designed by Piotr Aigner. This colonnade, modeled on the theatre of Marcellus in Rome, gave the building its most recognizable appearance. Later, the building housed rooms of the Society of the Encouragement of Fine Arts, and then the Museum of Industry and Agriculture. It was here in 1819 and 1891 that a young Maria Skłodowska worked, before the world knew her as Marie Curie. Right next door stands another interesting building, today's Dom Polonii, or the Polish Community House. It was built in the early 1860s, designed by Edward Cichocki and Piotr Leon Karasiński, on the site of the former Zamojski Palace. It was originally created as the headquarters of the Citizens Club, an elite social club for Warsaw's middle class and professionals. Balls, concerts, exhibitions, and social gatherings were held here. On the ground floor there was a large dining hall, while the upper floor contained elegant ballrooms. Like many places along Krakowskie Przedmieście, this building also has a difficult story of destruction and reconstruction. It burned during the war and was rebuilt after 1945. Later, it became the seat of the Polonia Society, which maintained ties with Polish communities abroad. Today it houses the Wspólnota Polska Association, and that is why the building is known as Dom Polonii, named after Andrzej Stelmachowski. The next building on the right is the Res Sacra Miser Chapel, also known as the Chapel of the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin Mary. This place grows directly out of the history of the Kazanowski Palace, because the chapel was arranged in the former dining room of that grand aristocratic residence. The palace belonged to Adam Kazanowski, one of the closest associates of King Władysław IV, and in its time it was considered one of the most impressive residences in 17th century Warsaw. Over time, however, the aristocratic residence changed its function. Part of it was taken over by the discalced Carmelite nuns. Later, the Warsaw Charitable Society operated here, and today it still serves charitable work. This function is also symbolized by the figure at the top of the facade, a pelican feeding its young with its own blood. Below it we can see the inscription Res Sacra Miser, meaning the poor are a sacred thing. Nearby stands the statue of Our Lady of Passau, a votive offering of thanks for saving Warsaw from a plague epidemic that struck the city in the late 1670s. Its erection also coincided with King John III Sobieski's victory at Vienna, which is why plaques honoring the king were placed on the pedestal. The statue was created and founded by Józef Szymon Bellotti, who lived in Warsaw's Muranów district, but originally came from Murano, the Venetian island famous for glassmaking. The spot where the statue stands was once a fork in Krakowskie Przedmieście, and the figure also served as an important landmark. A little further on, we pass Hoover Square. Today it is an open public space, but in the past, townhouses stood here. They were demolished in 1865. Officially, this was connected with an ambitious project by the Russian authorities, who wanted to run a railway line here, linking two Warsaw train stations. But there was another context as well. After the patriotic demonstrations of 1861, there were also ideas to open up this area and make it easier for the army to control the street, a place where clashes with Cossacks had taken place. Over time, the space became a small square. Its patron is Herbert Clark Hoover, later President of the United States, but especially important to Poland as the organizer of food aid after World War I. Beyond the square, we see the distinctive building of the former Dean's Inn, known as Dziekanka. This was once the seat of the Dean of the Warsaw chapter. As early as the beginning of the 15th century, there was a Dean's Manor here. It burned down during the wars of the 17th century, and later in the second half of the 18th century, the chapter built the structure we see today. In the 19th century, it served as an inn for travelers. After the war, the building was reconstructed and turned into a dormitory for students of the arts. Today, Dziekanka is connected with the Fryderyk Chopin University of Music. Two of Fryderyk Chopin's teachers also lived in this building. Wojciech Żywny, his first piano teacher, and Józef Elsner, his composition teacher, the director of the Warsaw Conservatory, and one of the first people to recognize the young Chopin's true musical genius. It is worth coming a little closer, because the building itself hides a few interesting details. The large recess by the entrance was once used by carriages turning into the courtyard. To the left of the gate you can spot the coat of arms of Kraków. And in the courtyard a sculpture of the Laikonik, a reminder of Dziekanka's post-war reconstruction, in which the city of Kraków took part. Next, we come to one of the most recognizable monuments in Warsaw, the monument to Adam Mickiewicz. It was unveiled on December 24, 1898, exactly 100 years after the poet's birth. The monument was created thanks to the initiative and tremendous involvement of Henryk Sienkiewicz, and it was founded by public donations, which came in on an impressive scale. The unveiling took place under the watchful eye of the Russian imperial authorities, with army patrols, Cossacks and police present. Even so, thousands of Warsaw residents gathered around the monument. A symbolic gift was also sent from Prague, in what is now the Czech Republic, a silver linden branch offered in honor of the monument. It is worth noticing the setting as well, the decorative iron fence and the lanterns, which are part of the monument's historic composition. But what we should remember that the statue we see today is no longer the original. After the fall of the Warsaw Uprising, the Germans dismantled the monument, cut it into pieces and took it to Germany as scrap metal. After the war, only some fragments were found. The monument was reconstructed and returned to its place in 1950. On the opposite side, it is hard to miss the Wessl Palace. It was built in the mid-18th century, most likely designed by Jakub Fontana for Andrzej Stanisław Kostka-Załuski. The name can be a little misleading, because the palace was built for Załuski, but over time it became associated with its later owners, the Wessel family. The palace changed hands many times, but it entered Warsaw's history for good when a post office was established here. And that is where its best known name comes from, the Saxon Post Office. From the late 18th century until the 1870s, a postal station operated here, maintaining connections with Saxony. Stagecoaches departed from here, letters and luggage were sent from here, and it was also from this place that Fryderyk Chopin left for Vienna on November 2, 1830. That journey became the beginning of his exile, from which he would never return to Warsaw. The palace we see today no longer looks exactly as it once did. When Trębacka Street was widened in the 19th century, the corner of the building was cut off, another floor was added, and that side received a new facade. During the war, the palace burned down, but after 1945 it was rebuilt. Today, this historic building houses the Regional Prosecutor's Office in Warsaw and the Institution of Justice. Across the street rises the Church of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary and of Saint Joseph the Spouse. It is also known as the former Carmelite Church or the Seminary Church. It was built from the second half of the 17th century for the Discalced Carmelites, and its history, as so often on Krakowskie Przedmieście, brings together Baroque architecture, classicism, and famous names. According to a popular Warsaw tradition, this is where the official wedding of Jan Sobieski and Maria Kazimiera, the famous Marysieńka, is said to have taken place. What is certain is that their official wedding was held on July 5, 1665, and was one of the most talked about social events of its time. What we see from the street is about 100 years younger than the church itself. The facade was designed by Ephraim Schreger and founded by Karol Stanisław Radziwiłł, who lived nearby and was famous for his catchphrase, Panie kochanku. This was the first stone classical facade in Warsaw. It is easy to recognize by its monumental columns, two small bell towers resembling incense burners, and the distinctive sphere with a host above a defeated serpent. It is from this rounded feature known in Old Warsaw as the Carmelite Bania that the saying was born, to swell up like the Carmelite Bania. Inside, the church has preserved its authentic Baroque and Rococo interior, not a post-war reconstruction, which is not something we can take for granted on this route. The main altar is dedicated to Saint Joseph and decorated with a glory ban Jan Jerzy Plersz. One of the most interesting features is the pulpit, with allegories of the 4 continents. After the monastery was dissolved following the January uprising, the complex was taken over by the Theological Seminary, and that is where its other well-known name comes from, the Seminary Church. After World War II, before St. John's Archcathedral in the Old Town was rebuilt, this church also served as Warsaw's temporary cathedral. A few steps further on, we reach the Namiestnikowski Palace, today's Presidential Palace. It is the largest palace in Warsaw, with a history deeply tied to the city and the Polish state. It was built in the 17th century for Stanisław Koniec-Polski and his son Aleksander. Later it passed to the Lubomirski family, and then for almost a century and a half to the Radziwiłł family. And it was during the Radziwiłł period that this place gained much of its former splendor. The palace was alive not only with politics but also with culture. It had a theater where King Stanisław August has his own box. And in February 1818, during a charity concert, 8-year-old Fryderyk Chopin gave his first public performance here. During the time of the Great Sejm, the palace also hosted meetings of the Friends of the Constitution of May 3rd, one of the first modern political organizations in Poland. The name Namiestnikowski Palace or Viceroy's Palace appeared after 1818, when the government of the Kingdom of Poland bought the building and made it the seat of the governor. General Józef Zajączek lived here, and the palace was remodeled in the classical style by Christian Piotr Aigner. That is when it received the form we still largely see today. In front of the palace stand two stone lions, carved in 1821 by Camillo Landini. Today they are among the symbols of Krakowskie Przedmieście, but in November 1830 they also served as improvised platforms. Speakers addressed the crowd from their backs. During the German occupation, the building was turned into the Deutsches Haus, or German house, but the palace itself survived, which allowed it to continue serving state functions after the war. It was here that the Warsaw Pact was signed in 1955, and it was also here that the Round Table talks took place in 1989. Since 1994, the palace has been the official seat of the President of the Republic of Poland. In the courtyard we can see the monument to Prince Józef Poniatowski, a work by Bertel Thorvaldsen with a history almost as turbulent as the history of Warsaw itself. The monument was commissioned during the time of the Congress Kingdom of Poland and was originally meant to stand right here. But after the fall of the November uprising, the Russian authorities withdrew permission to install it. The place, intended for a Polish hero, was eventually taken by a monument by Ivan Paskevich, the Russian governor rewarded for suppressing the uprising. So for a long time Poniatowski's monument could not find its place. Instead of coming to Warsaw, it was first sent to Modlin, then to Dęblin and Homel. Only after Poland regained independence did it return to the country. And before the war, it stood near Saxon Square. After the Warsaw Uprising, the Germans cut it into pieces and took it away as scrap metal. That is why the statue we see today is a reconstruction, unveiled here in front of the palace only in 1965. Opposite the Namiestnikowski Palace stands the Potocki Palace. Although its present name tells only part of the story. Earlier, this was the site of a manor belonging to Denhof family, the voivodes of Płock. Around 1760, the Czartoryski family rebuilt it into an impressive late Baroque residence. Only later did the palace pass into the hands of the Potocki family, and it is from them that the name we use today became established. From the street, the entrance is guarded by the Kordegarda, the former palace guardhouse, added in the second half of the 18th century. Today it houses the Kordegarda Gallery. We entered the courtyard through a rough iron gate from the late 19th century. Over the years, the palace changed owners and functions many times. In the 19th and 20th century, it housed various diplomatic missions. And in the guardhouse, there was even a bronze workshop run by the Łopiński brothers, as well as Arpad Chowańczak's fur shop. During the war, the building was burned by the Germans in 1944. After the war, it was rebuilt in a form inspired by its late 18th century appearance. Today, the palace is the seat of the Ministry of Culture and National Heritage. Next to the Namiestnikowski Palace stands the Hotel Bristol, one of the icons of elegant Warsaw in the early 20th century. It was built on the site of the former Tarnowski Palace, and its final form was designed by Władysław Marconi, who developed an earlier competition design. One of the main driving forces behind the project was Ignacy Jan Paderewski. He wanted to create a hotel in Warsaw that would meet the highest European standards. And indeed, when the Bristol opened in 1901, it quickly became a symbol of luxury, modernity, and high society. It was never just a hotel. It was also an important meeting place for artists, politicians, and influential figures. Guests from the highest circles stayed here. Marshal Piłsudski held balls in the Raspberry Room, Wojciech Kosak had his studio here, and Ignacy Paderewski had his own apartment. The hotel survived World War II in much better condition than most buildings in this part of the city, largely because it was occupied by the Germans until the very end. Its post-war years were more difficult. Under the Orbis State Hotel Company, it gradually lost its former shine and was finally closed in 1981. After renovation, already in a new era, the Bristol returned to the heights of luxury and once again became one of the most prestigious hotels in this part of Europe. And directly opposite stands its older, equally famous neighbor, the Hotel Europejski. It opened in the mid-19th century, designed by Henryk Marconi, the father of Władysław Marconi, the later architect connected with the Bristol. The Europejski quickly became one of the great ornaments of Krakowskie Przedmieście, and a meeting place for elites, politicians, artists, and high society guests. Among those who stayed here were Marlena Dietrich, Indira Gandhi, or Arthur Rubinstein. The hotel is also associated with Jan Kiepura, whose visit added even more glamour to the place and turned Krakowskie Przedmieście, at least for a moment, into a stage of the wider world. The famous Lohr's pastry shop also operated here, and for many years it was associated with this place almost as strongly as the hotel itself. There was also a whole world of shops and services from old elegant Warsaw, a bookstore, a hair salon, a jeweler, and even a Fiat showroom. The Hotel Europejski is also connected with a powerful patriotic episode. It was here after the demonstration on February 27, 1861, that the bodies of 5 demonstrators shot by Russian troops on Krakowskie Przedmieście were laid out. The next day, Karol Beyer photographed them, and the images of the 5 fallen became one of the most moving symbols of national mourning in those years. During the occupation, the hotel was taken over by the Germans and reserved exclusively for their officers. After the Warsaw Uprising, the building was burnt and heavily damaged, but the decision to rebuild it came fairly quickly. After the war, however, it did not immediately return to its old hotel function. It was rebuilt for a military college. Inside the ruin halls, completely new interiors were arranged. Lecture rooms, sleeping quarters for cadets, and even a gymnasium. Only later was the building turned back into a hotel. During the communist period, the Europejski was taken over by Orbis and returned to life as a hotel, but over the years it gradually lost its former shine. It was finally closed in 2005. Only after many years and after a major renovation that began in 2013 did it regain its former status. In 2018, it reopened once again as a luxury hotel. Right next to the Hotel Europejski stands the Dom bez Kantów, the house without corners, one of the most distinctive buildings of interwar Warsaw. It was built between 1933 and 1935 for the military housing found as an apartment building for officers. It was designed by Czesław Przybylski with the structure development by Stefan Bryła. The building rose on the site of the former Saxon forges, and although it is modernist, its scale was carefully adjusted to fit the neighboring Hotel Europejski. Its popular name, of course, comes from its shape, rounded corners with no sharp edges. There is also a well-known Warsaw anecdote connected with the building. According to the story, Józef Piłsudski was said to have told the builders, "Just make sure, gentlemen, that you build it without corners." In Polish this could also mean without shoddy deals, or without cheating. The architect took his words quite literally. Interestingly, this very modern building for its time survived World War II without major damage. After the war it was taken over by military institutions, and today it houses, among other things, the Pilecki Institute Gallery. On the other side of the street, let's stop for a moment at Father Jan Twardowski Square. Before the war, part of today's square was occupied by townhouses. They were destroyed in 1939 and were never rebuilt. One of them housed the editorial office of Kurier Warszawski, where Bolesław Prus published his famous weekly chronicles. And that is why Prus, the writer, journalist, author of The Dole, and one of the great observers of Warsaw life, is commemorated here with a monument. Unveiled in 1977, the sculpture does not show him as a distant bronze hero, but rather as a careful observer of everyday life, standing on a low pedestal, almost if he were about to step down and join our walk. The same townhouse also housed the photographic studio of Karol Beyer, whose remarkable historical photographs accompany us during today's walk. In another building there was a well-known wine shop, and in a third one government gymnasium operated, including a girls' school once attended by Maria Skłodowska-Curie. Today's square also commemorates Father Jan Twardowski, who could often be seen sitting here on a bench. He is a very Warsaw figure, priest, poet, and author of simple, wise poems, full of humor, tenderness, and everyday wonder. He sits here with a book in his hand, and if you come closer, you can even hear his own voice reading his poems.
Śpieszmy się kochać ludzie, tak szybko odchodzą, zostaną po nich buty i telefon głuchy. Najważniejsze tak prędkie, że nagle się stały. Potem cisza normalna, więc całkiem nieznośna, kiedy myślimy o kimś, bez niego zostało.
A little further on stands the monument to Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński, known as the Primate of the Millennium. He is one of those figures without whom it is hard to tell the story of post-war Poland. A clergyman, but also a great moral authority, a symbol of resistance to pressure from the communist authorities, and for many Poles, a source of strength during the hardest years of the communist period. A few steps further on, we reach the Visitationist Church. Officially the Church of the Protection of St. Joseph, spouse of the Blessed Virgin Mary. The Visitation Sisters came to Warsaw from France in the mid-17th century at the request of Queen Ludwika Maria Gonzaga. From the beginning, following the Queen's intention, they ran a boarding school for girls. Over time, their Warsaw convent became the oldest house of the order in Poland. The church we see today was built in the 18th century, in stages and with a long interruption. The architects confirmed in the records were Karol Bay and Jakub Fontana. The church survived World War II in surprisingly good condition. It was one of the few churches in this part of Warsaw to avoid complete destruction. Partly because it stood next to buildings occupied by the Germans, so bombing it could also have threatened their own positions. It survived both the bombing of September 1939 and the Warsaw Uprising. Later, it even escaped a planned post-war demolition, thanks to the efforts of Jan Zachwatowicz and Aleksander Geisztor. And that is why what we see here is not a reconstruction, but a real historic fragment of Old Warsaw. It is also worth stepping inside, because the interior has preserved a remarkable amount of its original decoration. One of the most famous features is the pulpit shaped like a boat, made in 1762 in the workshop of Jan Jerzy Plersz. The church also holds a very personal royal trace, the heart of Queen Ludwika Maria Gonzaga. And there is a beautiful Chopin connection here as well. Young Frederick played the organ in this church, which still keeps the atmosphere of 18th century Warsaw. And if we look beyond the convent wall, we discover an even quieter, more hidden side of this place. Behind the church stretches the Visitationist garden, an old green enclave on the escarpment, completely different from the busy Krakowskie Przedmieście. It was there, in a small house by the convent, that Father Jan Twardowski lived. He rode there, welcomed visitors, and for many years lived almost apart from the noise of the city. Right next to the Visitationist Church stands the Tyszkiewicz Palace, today more often called the Tyszkiewicz Potocki Palace. It is one of the most beautiful neoclassical palaces in Warsaw, founded by Ludwik Tyszkiewicz, the field hetman of Lithuania. Construction began in 1785, first under the direction of Stanisław Zawadzki and later under the royal architect Jan Christian Kamzetzer, who refined the design and gave the palace its final form. What makes this place especially interesting is its layout. Unlike many Warsaw residences, it was not set back deep inside the property. Instead, it was built directly along the street line. Because of that, it feels more like part of the city frontage than an isolated aristocratic residence. It also has two almost equally important facades, one facing Krakowskie Przedmieście and the other facing the Visitationist Church. The street facade is especially striking, with a balcony supported by four powerful atlases. These monumental figures were sculpted by the royal artist André Lebrun with the help of Giacomo Contieri. Inside, the palace once contained grand representative apartments, and one of its greatest highlights was a two-story reception hall, the former ballroom. Over time, the palace passed into the hands of the Potocki family, which explains its double name. In the 19th century, an annex and a neo-Renaissance gate were added on the church side. followed later by service buildings with stables, a coach house and an orangery. The war was much less kind to this place. In 1939 it survived, although with its windows torn out. But during the Warsaw Uprising, the Germans deliberately set it on fire with incendiary shells, and many of its priceless interiors were lost. After the war, the palace was rebuilt for the University of Warsaw, and today it still houses university departments, as well as the University of Warsaw Museum. And if you have a moment, it is worth going up to the first floor. There you can see some of the restored grand interiors, including the former ballroom and dining room, and it becomes much easier to imagine the splendor of this aristocratic residence. Next to the Tyszkiewicz Palace stands the Uruski Palace, also known as the Uruski Palace. The building we see today was constructed in the mid-19th century for Seweryn Uruski, but it stands on the site of a much older Poniatowski residence. And that earlier palace is connected with a beautiful historical detail. It was here, on November 29, 1764, that Stanisław August Poniatowski is said to have learned that he had been elected King of Poland. A reminder of that former residence can still be found on the courtyard side. A monument with an original fireplace slab built into it, the only surviving remnant of the old Poniatowski Palace. The Uruski Palace itself was built between 1844 and 1847, according to a design by Andrzej Gołoński. Above its facade you can see the Sas coat of arms and the inscription AGES, Latin for "You will act," or in other words, do rather than merely speak. From Krakowskie Przedmieście the building looks elegant and fairly restrained. But behind the facade there was a true urban residence, with a courtyard and side wings. Later the palace passed into the hands of the Czetwertyński family, which explains its double name. In the interwar period, it even housed the Consulate of Persia, later Iran. So this place had not only an aristocratic chapter, but also a diplomatic one. The war treated brutally. After the Warsaw Uprising, the palace was burned by the Germans. After the war, it was rebuilt for the University of Warsaw, and it still serves the university today. Walking a little further, we reach another one of the most recognizable spots on Krakowskie Przedmieście, the main gate of the University of Warsaw. It is worth remembering that when we enter the campus here today, we're not only stepping onto university grounds. We are also entering a place with a much older history, one that goes all the way back to Royal Warsaw. The gate we see from the street today is actually the newer one. It was designed by Stefan Schiller and built in 1910, replacing an earlier Saxon gate from the 18th century. In its niches stands two symbolic guardians of the university world: Athena with her helmet and Urania with a globe. It is under their watchful eyes that we enter the campus. Just beyond the gate, our attention is drawn to the building of the former university library, today known as the Old Booth. It opened in 1894, based on a design by Antoni Jabłoński-Jasieńczyk and Stefan Schiller. Today the building has preserved mainly its historic exterior, but it still makes a strong impression. For its time, it was remarkably modern, with a storage section based on a fire-resistant iron structure. Its facade was decorated with exceptionally rich sculptural ornament, On the attic, we can see the apotheosis of knowledge and science, and among the most recognizable figures are Sophocles and Demosthenes. Since the main university library moved down to Powiśle, the old building has been called the Old Booth, and it remains one of the most beautiful places on the entire campus. And right in front of it sits Sławek, the famous eternal student of the University of Warsaw. The oldest building of the University of Warsaw is the Kazimierzowski Palace. Completed before 1643, it was built on the edge of the Vistula escarpment as a royal villa, the Villa Regia. It was home at different times to King Władysław IV, King John II Casimir, and King John III Sobieski. After damage during the Swedish deluge and several later fires, the palace was rebuilt many times. Its present name comes from John II Casimir. In the 18th century, King Stanisław August assigned the place to the Corps of Cadets, also known as the School of Chivalry. From the early 19th century onward, the palace became increasingly connected with the newly emerging University of Warsaw. Its present neoclassical appearance comes mainly from the reconstruction carried out between 1820 and 1825. That is when it received its four-column portico and the tympanon with Apollo among the Muses. During World War II, the building burned down, but after the war it was rebuilt. Today it houses the rector's office and the main authorities of the university. After leaving the university campus, let's look across the street, toward Grodzki's townhouse at 7 Krakowskie Przedmieście. This address has long been associated with the fictional news shop of Stanisław Wokulski from The Dole, one of the great classics of Polish literature. Bolesław Prus placed his characters very precisely on the real map of Warsaw, which is why walks following the traces of the Dole are still popular today. Next, we reach the Czapski Palace complex, with the main building set back deeper inside the property. But let's stop first by the wing facing the street, because this is where the Chopin family once lived, and it was Fryderyk Chopin's last Warsaw address before he left the country in 1830. Although today we usually call it the Czapski Palace, the Czapskis were only one of the many families who owned this residence. Their name stuck mainly because the palace belonged to them at the time when a city map was published, marking it under that name. The building itself was begun in the early 18th century for Primate Michał Radziejowski, and its construction lasted about 25 years. Later it belonged among others to Michał Prażmowski and Adam Sieniawski. Over time the palace changed hands again, and its last private owners were the Krasiński family, especially General Wincenty Krasiński, the father of Zygmunt Krasiński, who was born right here. Later the School of Fine Arts operated here, and the place became associated with figures such as Wojciech Gerson, Leon Wyczółkowski and Ksawery Dunikowski. The war treated the palace brutally. The main body of the building burned down as early as September 1939, and the structures facing the street were gutted by fire in 1944. After the war, the entire complex was rebuilt with an effort to restore its former appearance and was handed over to the Academy of Fine Arts. In the courtyard, one more thing immediately catches the eye: the monument to the condottiere Bartolomeo Colleoni, a copy of the famous Renaissance statue by Andrea del Verrocchio in Venice. It came to Warsaw from Szczecin after the war, and in 1950 it was placed here as a model for students of the Academy. The current cast has stood in the courtyard since 2002, and over the years it has settled so naturally into the palace scenery that today it is hard to imagine this place without it. Now we return to Krakowskie Przedmieście and head toward the Holy Cross Basilica. The present Baroque church was built in stages from the late 17th to the mid-18th century, based on designs by Józef Szymon Bellotti and Jakub Fontana. And it is from this church that the whole Świętokrzyska story of names in this part of the city begins. Of course, this has nothing to do with the Świętokrzyskie Mountains or today's Świętokrzyskie province. It comes from the dedication of this Warsaw church, the Church of the Holy Cross. The church gave its name to the Świętokrzyski farm estate, established in the 18th century by the Vincentian priests. And from that estate came the name of the old field road that once ran through its land, today's Świętokrzyska Street. Over time, the name traveled even further. The street gave its name to Świętokrzyski Park, near the Palace of Culture and Science, to the Świętokrzyski Bridge, and also to Świętokrzyska Metro Station, at the intersection with Marszałkowska Street. So, in a way, it all begins right here, with the Church of the Holy Cross in Krakowskie Przedmieście. The church witnessed religious, state, and patriotic events. It was here, on the eve of his coronation, that Stanisław August Poniatowski went to confession and received communion. Later, many outstanding Poles were also given their final farewell here, including Józef Poniatowski, Stanisław Moniuszko, and Henryk Siemiradzki. In front of the facade stands the famous figure of Christ carrying the cross. Its first version, made according to a design by Andrzej Pruszyński, was placed here in 1858. 4 years later it was replaced by a more durable bronze copy, set on a granite pedestal with the inscription Sursum corda, lift up your hearts. During the war the church was first damaged in September 1939, and after the Warsaw Uprising it was almost completely destroyed by the Germans. It was then that the fallen figure of Christ, lying among the ruins, became one of the most powerful symbols of the city's collapse, but also of hope that had not died. Thrown down from its pedestal, the statue shattered on the devastated Krakowskie Przedmieście, and Christ's outstretched hand seemed to point toward the inscription on the pedestal, Sursum corda, lift up your hearts. It is hard to imagine a more moving sign in a city that has just been reduced to ruins. As early as July 1945, the restored statue returned to its place, even before the rebuilding of the church was fully completed. Inside the basilica, there is one of Poland's most important national relicts, the heart of Fryderyk Chopin. Although his body rests in Paris at Père Lachaise Cemetery, the composer's sister brought his heart back to Warsaw. For many years it was kept in the catacombs, and in 1880 it was moved to its present place and honored with a monument by Leandro Marconi. The heart of Władysław Reymont, the Polish writer and Nobel Prize winner, is also kept here. But the memory of this place does not end with the great names known from textbooks. In the catacombs, in the lower part of the church, lie among others Vincentian priests, Sisters of Charity, and important public figures from the time of the Great Sejm, the Duchy of Warsaw, and the Kingdom of Poland. The Holy Cross Basilica also has a place in more recent history. Since September 23, 1980, after one of the demands of the August strikes, Polish radio has broadcast a weekly mass from here, still aired every Sunday at 9 a.m. on Program 1. Now let's head to the final stop of today's walk, the monument to Nicolaus Copernicus, which in a way does not close Krakowskie Przedmieście, but symbolically opens it. The monument was unveiled in 1830, shortly before the outbreak of the November Uprising. Its author was the famous Danish sculptor Bertel Thorvaldsen, the same artist who created Warsaw's monument to Prince Józef Poniatowski. Copernicus sits here holding a compass and an armillary sphere, an old model showing the movement of celestial bodies. He looks calm, but symbolically, he reminds us of a man who truly changed the way all of Europe saw the world. The idea of erecting the monument was connected with Stanisław Staszic and the Society of Friends of Learning, one of the most important Polish scientific institutions during the time of the partitions. This was a circle of people who believed that if Poland no longer exists on the map, then language, science, memory, and national pride had to be protected even more carefully. So the Copernicus monument was not only a tribute to a great astronomer, it was also a declaration. We have our scholars, our own history, and our own place in European culture. The unveiling ceremony itself had a rather unusual character. A large crowd gathered, but, as the story goes, not everyone fully understood what kind of ceremony they were attending. A mass was also planned at the Holy Cross Church, but the Vincentian priests did not want to celebrate it. The reason was rather ironic: the memory of the old church controversy surrounding heliocentrism. For a long time, Copernicus' work had raised suspicions, and the theory was associated with something that did not easily fit the old order of the world. And so, in Warsaw, a monument was being unveiled to the man who stopped the sun and moved the earth, while nearby, the shadow of disputes from centuries earlier could still be felt. On the pedestal, the inscription read, "To Nicolaus Copernicus from his compatriots." And during the German occupation, that very inscription became the reason for one of the most famous acts of small-scale sabotage. The Germans covered the Polish inscription with a plaque suggesting that Copernicus was a German astronomer. In response, a young scout from the Grey Ranks, Aleksy Dawidowski, known as Alek, unscrewed the German plaque and revealed the Polish inscription underneath. It was 1942, Warsaw was under occupation, and such a gesture required enormous courage. The Nazis, of course, did not leave it unanswered. As a reprisal, they removed several monuments from the city, including the monument to Jan Kiliński, whose almost grotesque wartime story we tell during our walk through the Old Town. Behind Copernicus, we can see the Staszic Palace, which also has a turbulent history. But that is a story for another walk, along Nowy Świat. And this is where we end our route along Krakowskie Przedmieście. the former Grand Salon of Warsaw, a street of palaces, churches, universities, monuments and great names. Before the war, Warsaw was called the Paris of the North, but that title did not come only from elegant facades, broad streets and big city life. It also came from ambition, from the need to speak with the world, and from a belief in science, culture and freedom. On this route we passed royal residences, churches, the hearts of great artists, traces of uprising, wartime destruction and rebuilding. And we end beside Copernicus, a man who showed that sometimes you have to be brave enough to move the center of the world. Thank you for walking with us along Krakowskie Przedmieście. If you enjoyed this route, subscribe to the channel, visit our website for the walking map, and keep exploring with us, because Warsaw still has many more stories to tell. In the next episode, we will continue on to Nowy Świat.